Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? The rain had begun in earnest by the time the grandfather clock struck 4, a steady percussion against the modest panes of the Beresfords' sitting room. It was the sort of rain that seemed to settle in for the evening, neither storm nor drizzle, but a stubborn grey curtain that blurred the rooftops of the little suburban row and made the world seem smaller, closer, and more private. Inside, the room gave the impression of having been made deliberately snug against such weather. The fire burned with cheerful crackles, a brass kettle murmured on the hob, and 2 worn armchairs stood like sentinels of comfort on either side of the hearth. Tuppence Beresford, however, was not in an armchair. She was at the window, restless, fingers tapping the sill, eyes following the uncertain outlines of the street beyond. Restlessness clung to her as naturally as other women wore pearls. "I don't know why it always rains when I've set my mind on taking a walk," she declared. From the depths of his chair opposite the fire, Tommy Beresford lowered the newspaper just enough to expose his amiable face. His hair had thinned slightly with the years, but the mischievous gleam in his eyes was as unrepentant as ever. "Because, my dear girl," he said, "you insist on making plans. The weather gods never approve of that sort of thing. If you would be more like me and let the day drift along as it pleases, you'd never be disappointed." Tuppence gave him a look that might have withered a less confident man. "You mean you'd never notice?" she retorted. "You could sit contentedly through a blizzard or a drought, provided there was a chair beneath you and a cup of tea within reach." At that moment, as though to contradict him, the kettle whistled a thin shrill. Tommy folded his paper with leisurely precision, rose and set about pouring 2 cups. He was midway through the ceremony when the sharp rap of the letterbox interrupted the domestic rhythm. Tuppence turned quickly. "The postman? At this hour?" Tommy, balancing cups, frowned. "Unlikely. He passed before luncheon." She was already halfway across the room, her quick step echoing on the polished floorboards. The envelope lay just inside the door, slightly askew, as though it had been thrust hastily. Tuppence bent to retrieve it. The paper was smudged, the flap irregularly sealed, and there was no stamp, no postmark. "Hand-delivered," she murmured. Tommy set the cups down, curiosity overcoming even his devotion to tea. "A bill, perhaps? Tradesmen grow imaginative with their methods." But the envelope bore no name, no direction, simply her address written in a cramped, uneven scrawl. And inside, she slid a finger beneath the flap. There was only a single sheet, thick, cream-coloured, faintly ridged. The words upon it were few, but they leapt from the page with startling urgency. The 5th door must never be opened. That was all. No signature. Tuppence read it twice, her brows drawing together. Then she carried it to the light of the fire, as though flames might disclose what ink did not. Tommy, less impressed, leaned back against the mantel. "My dear girl, some local schoolboy has been amusing himself. Doors, 5th or otherwise, are common enough. I dare say he's also written thrilling notes about the perils of the 7th window and the 2nd staircase." She ignored him, examining the paper more closely. "No, Tommy. Look here. See the watermark?" She tilted it, and faint letters shimmered faintly against the firelight. Greystone. Tommy's expression changed. He knew the name. A manor in Dorset, half ruined, half revered, and wholly bound up in whispered stories. It had belonged for generations to the Winslow family, wealthy, eccentric, occasionally notorious. "You can't possibly be suggesting," he began. "I'm suggesting," said Tuppence firmly, "that this is not a schoolboy prank. Whoever wrote this wanted it delivered directly to us, and they wanted us to know about a door in Greystone Manor." Tommy shook his head with tolerant amusement. "We don't even know anyone there." Tuppence smiled faintly. "As it happens, I do. Harriet Winslow. We were at school together. She was one of those pale, serious girls who read poetry when the rest of us plotted midnight feasts. We've kept up a sort of correspondence over the years. Nothing dramatic, but enough." Tommy sighed. "Of course, fate never drops its enigmas on a stranger. It always insists on an acquaintance, preferably a tenuous one. She tapped the letter against her palm thoughtfully. "The 5th door. It has the ring of a clue, don't you think? Why not simply say, 'Keep out of the west wing,' or 'Beware of the attic'? Why such deliberate phrasing?" "Because, darling, deliberate phrasing is what lunatics thrive upon." The rain drummed harder against the windows. The room, despite its fire, seemed to contract a little under the weight of the message. Tommy busied himself with his tea, sipping in deliberate gulps. But Tuppence sat upright, the letter on her knee, her eyes alight in that way he both admired and dreaded. "Suppose," she said slowly, "this letter is real, intended to warn or to frighten. Why us? Why not Harriet herself?" "Because Harriet knows better than to leap at shadows, whereas you," he waved a hand indulgently, "you thrive upon them." Her gaze sparkled. "Exactly, which makes us the ideal recipients." For a while the rain filled the silence, the only sound beyond the ticking clock and the crackle of logs. The shadows lengthened in the corners, and the comfortable little sitting room took on a curious sense of expectancy, as though waiting for one of them to make a move. At last, Tommy set his cup down with a sigh. "I suppose you mean to drag me to Dorset." "Only if you consider yourself still my partner in adventure." He smiled despite himself. "I suppose I do." Her hand covered his, warm and quick. "Then, Tommy dear, we had better see about train times. One does not ignore mysterious doors, particularly when there are 5 of them." He groaned. "You know perfectly well that 4 would have done just as well. 5 suggests melodrama." "Melodrama," said Tuppence, folding the letter neatly, "is precisely what keeps life interesting." Outside, the rain fell with renewed force, rattling the panes as though echoing her words. The sitting room, once snug and ordinary, had become the threshold of something darker, more compelling, and in the heart of it, folded away like a seed of trouble, lay the letter from nowhere. Neither of them said what both privately thought, that some doors, once mentioned, had a way of opening on their own. The train clattered steadily southward, its rhythm a counterpoint to the grey wash of fields beyond the window. Dorset stretched out in muted tones, sodden meadows, bare-limbed oaks, and the occasional cottage roof glistening under a grudging drizzle. Tuppence leaned forward, chin resting on her hand, her bright eyes reflecting both curiosity and resolve. Tommy, opposite her, folded a newspaper with an air of resignation. "I shall remind you," he said, "that this is folly of the highest order. Perfectly good afternoons squandered on damp scenery and dubious invitations. We could be at home, enjoying crumpets." "Crumpets," said Tuppence, "are all very well, but they are not enigmas. And enigmas, as you may recall, are our business." She patted her bag, where the folded letter lay concealed. "Besides, we haven't seen Harriet in years. It would be positively rude not to call." Tommy gave her a long look. "Harriet Winslow did not, as far as I recall, send us an invitation. An unsigned letter is not generally considered a summons to tea." She smiled, unperturbed. "Ah, but curiosity is always a valid excuse." The train slowed at the small station, and moments later they were deposited on the platform, greeted by a blast of damp wind that tugged at hats and collars. A motor car awaited them, a black, gleaming vehicle of old-fashioned design. The driver, in a neat cap and gloves, touched the brim in acknowledgement but said little. They climbed in, and the car swept them away from the village and into the countryside proper. As they drove, the land seemed to grow emptier, the hedgerows higher, the trees darker. Finally, rounding a bend, the house came into view. Greystone Manor. It loomed against the horizon like a relic of another age. The stone facade was weathered, streaked with lichens and shadows, its turrets and chimneys rising against the leaden sky. The windows reflected no warmth, only the pale glimmer of rainlight. The iron gates creaked as they swung inward, and the gravel crunch of the drive sounded unnaturally loud. Tommy whistled low. Cheerful little place. Tuppence's eyes sparkled. Atmosphere, Tommy. Exactly what we require. The car halted before the great oak doors, which opened before they reached them. A woman stood framed in the archway. She was slim, her face pale against dark hair, her smile uncertain. "Tuppence," she said, breathless, as though the word itself had taken effort. How good to see you, after all these years." "Harriet!" Tuppence exclaimed warmly, embracing her. Yet she noted the quick, darting glance Harriet cast over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might overhear even this ordinary greeting. Tommy bowed slightly. "An unexpected pleasure, Miss Winslow." Harriet flushed. Yes, of course. Come in out of the rain." The great hall was vast, echoing with the sound of their footsteps. Suits of armour stood guard along the walls, their visors down, their steel dulled by time. Portraits hung in heavy gilt frames, the Winslow ancestors staring down with disapproval etched in every line. A fire smouldered in the immense hearth, but the warmth seemed to vanish into the cavernous ceiling before reaching the visitors. "Allow me to present the household," Harriet said quickly. Her tone carried a nervous eagerness, as if reciting rehearsed lines. First came Lady Winslow, the matriarch of Greystone. She sat in a carved chair by the hearth, erect despite her age, her dark gown severe, her eyes as sharp as a hawk's. She regarded Tommy and Tuppence with the chilly courtesy of one who sees strangers as a necessary inconvenience. Next was Adrian Winslow, her nephew. He was a handsome fellow, lounging in careless ease with a cigarette between long fingers, his smile too quick, his charm too polished. "Delighted," he said lazily, rising just enough to take Tuppence's hand. "Always a treat to have visitors. Greystone is frightfully dull otherwise." In the background hovered Miss Latham, Harriet's companion. A woman of indeterminate age, she wore a plain grey dress and kept her eyes lowered, though not so low that Tuppence missed their quick, watchful glances. And finally, there was the butler, a tall man with a grave expression and manner too attentive to be entirely genuine. His name, Harriet murmured, was Graves, a choice of surname that seemed almost too apt. Introductions complete, the Beresfords were led through a series of chambers that seemed to grow progressively darker, as though the heart of the manor resisted illumination. Panelled corridors stretched long and shadowed. The air carried the faint must of locked rooms. Tuppence felt a prickling awareness. Behind some of those doors, secrets lingered. Dinner was announced with a solemnity befitting a royal court. The dining hall was long, its high windows streaked by rain. Candles flickered in silver candelabra, casting uncertain light upon the table. The meal itself was elaborate, but conversation stumbled like a lame horse. Adrian, at least, attempted gallantry, peppering Tuppence with light questions and offering Tommy wine with mock chivalry. Harriet, pale and tense, answered little. Lady Winslow maintained her regal silence. Miss Latham hardly spoke at all. It was Tuppence who, between courses, allowed her curiosity to take form. Her voice was lightly conversational, her smile perfectly innocent. "Such a magnificent house," she said, "though I couldn't help noticing, in the west corridor, several doors quite close together. How many are there exactly? 4, 5? The effect was immediate. Forks paused, glances collided. A silence spread, heavy as lead. Lady Winslow's voice, when it came, was cold and clipped. "The architecture of Greystone need not concern our guests." Tuppence inclined her head politely. "Of course. I only wondered—" Harriet interrupted quickly, her tone forced. "Tuppence, you must tell us about London. I do so miss it." Adrian chuckled, but it was a thin sound. "Indeed. Let's not bore our visitors with corridors and doors. They'll think us positively Gothic." Yet the very attempt to laugh it off only deepened the impression. Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence, and in that glance an entire unspoken conversation occurred. The letter had struck true. The 5th door, whatever it was, held meaning here. Dessert passed with little improvement in atmosphere. When at last Lady Winslow rose, the others followed as though released from invisible bonds. The butler moved to open the doors with exaggerated precision, his eyes betraying nothing. Later, as Harriet showed them to their chambers, Tuppence caught her friend's hand briefly. "Harriet," she murmured, "what is it about the 5th door?" Harriet's face blanched. "Please, don't ask. Not here. Not now." She turned swiftly, leaving them at their threshold with more questions than answers. Inside their room, Tommy dropped heavily into a chair. "Well, old thing, you've done it again. 5 minutes at table and already we're social pariahs." Tuppence's smile was satisfied. "Pariahs with purpose. Did you see their faces?" "Yes," he said grimly. and I didn't like them. The wind rattled the casement, and somewhere within the great house a door creaked shut of its own accord. The Beresfords, alone in their chamber, felt the weight of Greystone Manor pressing in, the weight of secrets, of silences, and of that single unanswered enigma. The fifth door. Night had settled heavily upon Greystone Manor, the sort of night that presses close to old stone walls and deepens every shadow. Rain still whispered against the high windows, but the storm had lessened to a steady drizzle, leaving only the sigh of wind through the chimneys. Within their chamber, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford lay abed, though in differing states of repose. Tommy, in a borrowed dressing gown and with his head comfortably pressed into the pillow, had already drifted towards sleep, his breathing evening into that unmistakable rhythm of contented indifference. Tuppence, however, lay wide-eyed, staring at the carved canopy above, her mind busier than the manor's entire staff. The dinner's awkward silence lingered in her thoughts like a sour note in an otherwise familiar tune. Every face around that long table had shifted at the mention of the doors, every one. Harriet had paled, Lady Winslow had frozen into icier hauteur, Adrian had attempted flippancy, and Miss Latham had seemed positively stricken. Only the butler had betrayed nothing, and that, to Tuppence, was almost more telling than any outburst. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock chimed midnight. The sound rolled through the corridors, muffled and distorted, like a voice from a cavern. Tuppence turned on her side, sighing, trying to will herself into calm. And then she heard it, a faint metallic scrape. Her eyes opened instantly, trained toward the door of their chamber. The sound came again, a careful, deliberate twist of metal against metal. Someone was at a lock, not their own door, but one nearby. Tuppence sat up, heart quickening. "Tommy," she whispered urgently. He groaned, tugging at his pillow. What is it?" "Listen." He resisted at first, but years of partnership had taught him that when Tuppence's voice carried that edge, dismissal was unwise. He sat up reluctantly, straining his ears. For a moment there was nothing, only the shifting sigh of wind. Then came the sound again, distinct now, a lock, a handle, and the soft tread of footsteps. Tommy swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, ghostly footsteps at midnight. Next you'll tell me it's the headless butler." But he too reached for his dressing gown, tying the cord with more energy than his tone admitted. Tuppence had already pulled a shawl about her shoulders and was at the door. She opened it with the quiet care of a conspirator. The corridor stretched long and dim, lit only by a single sconce at the far end. The old panelling drank the light, leaving pools of shadow between each door. The air smelled faintly of beeswax polish and something older, something closed away. "There," Tuppence breathed, pointing. A shadow, unmistakable, slipped around the corner toward the west wing. Tommy grunted. "Could still be the butler. They do creep about." "Not like that," she replied, already stepping into the hall. Together they followed, their slippered feet making scarcely a sound on the carpet runner. As they turned the corner, the corridor narrowed, and the atmosphere seemed to thicken. "One," Tuppence whispered, as they passed the first closed door. The wood was dark oak, the handle tarnished. "Two," she counted softly, noting another, identical save for a faint scratch near the lock. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Conducting a census?" "4 ordinary doors, and then," she whispered, her eyes alight. "3, she murmured, pausing at the next, and then 4. This one bore a faded plaque, the inscription too worn to decipher. At last they stood before it. The 5th door. It was broader than the rest, heavier, its brass handle dulled by age but marked with peculiar scarring, as though tools had once tried and failed against it. The air felt cooler here, and the silence pressed more keenly. Tuppence touched the handle lightly, and a shiver went through her fingers. "It's this one," Tommy frowned, leaning closer. "There's been tampering. Look at those marks. Someone has worked at this lock before, and not with finesse." Before she could reply, a sound broke the stillness, a quick gasp, sharp and human. They turned swiftly. Miss Latham stood a few paces away, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly at her breast. She looked as though she had stepped out of the wall itself, her grey gown blending into the panelled shadows. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice unsteady, half scandalized, half afraid. "We might ask you the same," said Tuppence evenly. Miss Latham's eyes flicked to the door, then away. "You must go back to your room, please. It isn't safe to linger in the corridors at night." Tommy folded his arms. "Corridors don't usually bite, and locked doors, in my experience, remain locked unless someone has reason otherwise." She shook her head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. Some things are better left alone." "Like the fifth door?" Tuppence asked softly. Miss Latham flinched as though struck. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Instead, she lifted a hand, a gesture half command, half plea. "Please, for your own good, return at once." The intensity of her tone, the pallor of her cheeks, lent weight to her warning. For a long moment, the three of them stood suspended in a silence that seemed to hold more voices than their own. At last, Tommy sighed, ever the practical one. "Very well, but you'll forgive us if we remain curious." Miss Latham's eyes shone with something between fear and sorrow. "Curiosity here is dangerous." With that, she turned and hurried back the way she had come, her footsteps fading swiftly into silence. Tuppence exhaled slowly, her hand still resting lightly on the brass handle. "She's hiding something, that much is certain." Tommy took her arm gently, steering her away. "Darling, everyone in this house is hiding something. That seems to be the local sport." Reluctantly, she allowed herself to be led back toward their room, yet with every step the sense of unease grew. She had glimpsed a shadow, heard the scrape of metal, seen the scars upon the fifth lock. Miss Latham's intrusion had prevented discovery, but had also confirmed the importance of what lay beyond. Once inside their chamber again, Tommy bolted the door with exaggerated firmness. "There. Now, if any spectral locksmiths come calling, we can tell them we're not at home." Tuppence did not smile. She sat on the edge of the bed, her shawl drawn tight. "Tommy, that door, whatever lies behind it, they are desperate to keep it hidden. Did you see Miss Latham's face? She was terrified." "Terrified, yes. But of what? Of us? Of the door? Or of someone who might overhear?" Tuppence shook her head. "All three, perhaps." They lapsed into silence, each occupied with their own thoughts. The house creaked faintly, the timbers shifting with age and damp. Somewhere far off, a door closed softly, or perhaps only the wind sighed through a gap. Finally, Tuppence lay down again, though her eyes remained open long after Tommy's had closed. The letter, the dinner, the midnight whisper of locks, it all converged into a single certainty. The fifth door was no idle curiosity. It was a barrier, a secret, and perhaps a threat. And as the hours dragged on, she could not help but feel that unseen eyes lingered still upon that corridor, watching, waiting. The unease settled like a mist, seeping into the walls of Greystone Manor. The mystery had sharpened, and the Beresfords had stepped squarely into its heart. The fifth door remained closed, but not, Tuppence felt sure, forever. Morning came to Greystone Manor reluctantly, as though the old house resented the intrusion of daylight. A thin sun broke through the mists that clung to the Dorset hills, sending pale fingers through the tall windows of the drawing-room. Inside, however, the atmosphere remained thick with the residue of the previous night. The Winslow family and their guests assembled for breakfast with strained civility. A silver tea service gleamed on the sideboard, and the scent of toast and eggs tried valiantly to instill a sense of homeliness. It nearly succeeded, until one looked at the faces around the table. Adrian lounged in his chair with practiced indolence, flicking crumbs from his cuff and directing lazy remarks toward Tuppence. "I do hope you slept well, Mrs. Beresford," he said, smiling with a charm a shade too deliberate. "Greystone can be a trying place for new arrivals. Too many draughts, too many shadows." "On the contrary," Tuppence replied lightly, "we found it most interesting." Harriet, seated beside her, stirred her tea with nervous precision. She glanced quickly at her aunt, Lady Winslow, who maintained her customary silence, then leaned closer to Tuppence. "Some parts of the house," Harriet whispered, "are best left unspoken. I beg you, don't pursue it further." Tuppence gave her friend a reassuring smile, but stored the words away. Never to be discussed was as good as an engraved invitation. Tommy, meanwhile, occupied himself with the morning paper, a brow raised at the market's page. "Adrian," he said conversationally, "your name appears here, in connection with a rather sporting racehorse. Care to enlighten us?" Adrian laughed, careless. "Ah, yes. I dabble now and then. Nothing serious." Tommy folded the paper neatly. "So long as the dabbling doesn't extend to creditors at the door, one hears unfortunate tales." Adrian's smile tightened for the briefest moment before he shrugged. "My dear Beresford, you mustn't believe every tale you hear. I manage well enough." It was at that moment that the butler, Graves, entered to replenish the teapot. His presence was as grave as his name, tall, precise, his expression one of neutral superiority. Yet Tuppence, sharp-eyed as always, noted that Harriet seemed to shrink slightly at his approach, as though he carried more authority than his position warranted. The breakfast concluded with little cheer, and soon the party dispersed. Tommy, with casual cheer, suggested a stroll in the gardens with Adrian, whose vanity was easily flattered. "Tell me all about this horse of yours," Tommy urged, guiding him toward the French doors. Tuppence, thus liberated, excused herself to Harriet. "I'll just have a wander," she said airily. "So many charming corners in a house like this." Harriet hesitated, then touched her arm. "Tuppence, please, don't go prying. There are things here best forgotten." But Tuppence was already halfway down the corridor, her curiosity blazing like a torch. She moved with purpose, retracing steps she had noticed the night before. The west wing was too dangerous to attempt in daylight, too many eyes, but the old library lay on the south side, unused for years, if the dust on the doors was to be believed. She found it at the end of a dim passage, the heavy oak door resisting slightly before yielding with a creak. The air inside was cooler, tinged with the scent of old leather and disuse. Rows of tall shelves stood like silent sentries, their volumes cloaked in dust. Long curtains hung at the windows, filtering sunlight into subdued bars across the floor. Tuppence's heart quickened. Libraries, she had always felt, were repositories not only of books but of secrets. She began at the great oak desk near the window. Papers lay scattered, as though someone had been interrupted mid-task years ago and never returned. Diaries, ledgers, estate accounts. She leafed through them with deft fingers. Names and figures swam before her eyes, columns of expenditure, references to tenants and rents. Then, abruptly, gaps. Whole pages torn or neatly excised. Her pulse quickened. Missing records were as eloquent as damning ones. At last, she found a thin volume bound in green morocco, half buried under a ledger. It appeared to be a personal journal, written in a firm masculine hand. She scanned quickly, her eyes catching on a phrase that made her breath hitch. "The fifth key, entrusted to me by my husband, must remain hidden." Tuppence read it twice. Lady Winslow's late husband, then, had possessed a fifth key. To what? The door in the west wing was already infamous. Could it be that this key was its twin? She was bending closer, eager to read more, when a voice cut the silence like a knife. "Madam," she started violently, nearly dropping the book. Graves, the butler, stood in the doorway, his tall frame blotting the light. His eyes were fixed upon her with an intensity at odds with his neutral tone. "I trust you are not lost," he said. Tuppence recovered quickly, tucking the journal beneath a ledger with casual grace. "Not at all. I've always admired libraries, and this one looked so lonely, I thought it deserved company." Graves advanced slowly, each step deliberate. "The family prefers that this room remain undisturbed. Many of the books are delicate." "Of course," Tuppence said sweetly. "I should hate to upset a single volume." Yet she caught the edge in his words, the sharpness of command beneath the livery. This was no mere servant politely protecting his employer's belongings. His tone carried warning, almost menace. Graves reached the desk, his gloved hand resting lightly on the ledgers. "It would be best, madam, if you confined your explorations to the more public rooms of the house. The drawing-room, the parlour, perhaps the gardens. The family treasures its privacy." Tuppence met his gaze evenly. "Privacy is a fragile thing in a house with so many doors, Mr. Graves." His eyes narrowed. For a long moment, silence pressed between them. Then he inclined his head with mechanical precision. "Quite so. If you would allow me, I shall escort you back to the drawing-room." With no graceful alternative, Tuppence followed. But as she walked, her mind raced. The phrase from the journal rang in her ears. The fifth key. And Graves's arrival at precisely the wrong moment suggested more than coincidence. They returned to the sunlit parlour, where Harriet sat with embroidery, her hands trembling slightly. Adrian and Tommy were visible through the French doors, strolling among the roses, Adrian's gestures expansive, Tommy's expression blandly attentive. Graves bowed stiffly. "If you require anything further, madam, you have only to ring." He withdrew, but the impression of his presence lingered long after he had gone. Tuppence settled beside Harriet, speaking lightly of inconsequential things, but beneath her chatter she studied her friend. Harriet's eyes were shadowed, her smile forced. Every so often her needle faltered, leaving the thread tangled. "There are troubles here, aren't there?" Tuppence said softly at last. Harriet's hand froze. "Please, I can't—" "You can," Tuppence insisted gently. "I'm your friend. If you can't tell me, who can you tell?" Harriet swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the floor. "It isn't only the house, it's the family. Adrian owes money, so much money. There are whispers that my mother considers selling parts of the estate. And then—" she broke off, glancing toward the doorway. "No, it's dangerous even to speak of it." Tuppence took her hand warmly. "Then let me speak for you. You don't have to say a word, but I intend to find out what's hidden behind that door." Harriet's eyes widened with fear. "Don't, please, Tuppence. If you value your safety, don't go near it." But the plea only steeled Tuppence's resolve. Secrets hidden in locked libraries and guarded corridors did not remain so forever. And if Adrian's debts, Lady Winslow's pride, and Graves's sharp intrusion all pointed toward a single mystery, then that mystery lay at the heart of Greystone Manor. She glanced out at Tommy, feigning polite conversation with the charming rogue of a nephew. Her husband, bless him, had perfected the art of looking harmless while collecting every morsel of gossip. Together they formed a team that mysteries seldom survived. The fifth key, the fifth door, and a household bound together by silence. Tuppence sat back, her smile serene, but her mind sharper than ever. The game was deepening, and she had no intention of leaving it unfinished. The afternoon was deceptively beautiful. Clouds had rolled back, leaving the Winslow gardens awash in mellow sunlight. The roses, heavy with rain, glittered like jewels. Their perfume mingled with the damp scent of clipped hedges and wet earth. It was the sort of scene one might have painted for a calendar. A stately house, elegant gardens, family gathered for tea. Only the undercurrent of unease, invisible to the casual eye, hinted at the storm to come. Tuppence adjusted her hat against the glare and settled beside Harriet on a wrought-iron chair. A table was spread with china cups, lemon slices gleaming in cut-glass dishes, and a silver pot steaming gently. Adrian, jaunty as ever, poured himself a generous measure of tea, flicking an ash from his cigarette with studied nonchalance. Lady Winslow sat erect at the head, her black gown stark against the profusion of roses, her gaze colder than the silver tray. Miss Latham lingered slightly apart, her embroidery basket set at her feet, though her hands remained idle. "Splendid roses," Adrian remarked, inhaling the scent theatrically. "If only one could live on flowers instead of accounts. The former are infinitely more agreeable." "Roses," Lady Winslow said sharply, "require pruning, Adrian, as do accounts." He laughed, undeterred. "My dear aunt, you prune too vigorously. A little disorder gives life its charm." Tuppence, sipping delicately, noted the strain beneath the banter. Harriet's hands trembled as she buttered a scone. Miss Latham's gaze darted toward the house as though expecting interruption. Graves, the butler, hovered in the background with his usual implacable solemnity, pouring tea with precision that bordered on disdain. It was Tommy who noticed the switch. He had leaned back, feigning languor, but his eyes were busy. Adrian had set his glass aside while bending to retrieve a dropped cigarette. In the flurry, Graves moving with the tray while Harriet, flustered and pale, fumbled a napkin. The cups had changed places. Tommy frowned, leaning forward, but said nothing. Adrian raised the cup with a flourish, smiling over the rim. To roses, to debts, and to the inscrutable future, he toasted lightly and drank. The effect was swift and terrible. His smile froze. The cup clattered against the saucer as his hand convulsed. He rose halfway, choking, his face contorting, then collapsed across the table, sending china and silver crashing to the gravel. A scream tore from Harriet's throat. Lady Winslow remained rigid, her knuckles white on the arm of her chair. Miss Latham gave a strangled cry and dropped to her knees beside Adrian, though she seemed more horrified than helpful. Tommy was already at the man's side, fingers at his throat, eyes narrowed. "Poison," he muttered grimly. "Too fast for anything else." Graves stood immobile, his face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of alarm. "Fetch the doctor," Tommy commanded sharply. Harriet bolted to her feet. "I'll go." "No," Lady Winslow cut in, her voice steel. "Graves will see to it." The butler inclined his head and moved with efficient haste, though Tommy suspected his composure was more mask than nature. Tuppence bent to Harriet, whose trembling was now uncontrollable. "Steady, darling, breathe. This wasn't your doing." Harriet's lips moved, but no sound emerged. She clutched at Tuppence's hand like a drowning woman. The doctor arrived within the hour, brisk, moustached, and smelling faintly of carbolic. His verdict was swift. Poison, without a doubt. In the tea, most likely. Quick-acting, enough to fell a man in moments. Lady Winslow inclined her head, her expression unchanging. Then it was deliberate. The doctor's eyes flickered over the group, discomfort plain. "Deliberate, yes. I shall have to report it at once." And so the police came. Inspector Craddock was a solid man of middle years, with a weather-beaten face and the air of one long accustomed to human folly. He surveyed the garden with a glance that took in every detail: the scattered china, the prone figure now covered respectfully with a blanket, the pale faces of the household. "Well," he said, rubbing his chin, "this is a fine to-do, a country house, a family gathering, and poison in the teacups, almost a storybook crime." His gaze rested on Tommy and Tuppence, narrowing. "And you are?" "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," Tommy said evenly. "Guests of the family." Craddock snorted. "Guests who look more like amateur sleuths, if you ask me. Still, we'll see. For now, no one leaves this house until I've had my say." He moved among them with brisk efficiency, questioning each in turn. Lady Winslow answered with icy dignity, denying knowledge of any enemies her nephew might have had. Harriet, still pale, insisted she had seen nothing unusual, though her hands twisted in her lap with nervous intensity. Miss Latham, when pressed, faltered. I thought perhaps Adrian looked unwell before tea, but perhaps it was only the light." Craddock's eyes sharpened. "Contradictory, miss. Either he was ill, or he wasn't." Miss Latham flushed, stammering an apology. Tuppence watched keenly, noting every glance, every hesitation. It was clear the inspector found little to like in any of them. When at last the statements were done, Craddock turned to Tommy. "And you, sir? You look as though you've something to say." Tommy met his gaze. "Adrian's cup was switched, I'm sure of it. Whether by accident or design, I can't yet say." A ripple went through the group. Harriet gasped, Lady Winslow's eyes flashed, and Miss Latham covered her mouth. "Switched?" Craddock demanded. "Yes." He bent to the ground. When he straightened, his cup was no longer where he had set it. "By whom?" Tommy spread his hands. "That's the question, isn't it?" The inspector grunted. "So the poison might not have been meant for Adrian at all. We'll need to consider that." The weight of his words settled heavily over the gathering. Was Adrian the intended victim, or had he merely drunk from a cup meant for another? As dusk crept over the garden, the body was borne away. The roses, so fragrant and bright, seemed now to exhale the bitter scent of corruption. Inside, the household gathered once more, subdued, brittle. Lady Winslow presided with iron self-control, yet her eyes betrayed strain. Harriet sat withdrawn, her nerves stretched thin as wire. Miss Latham hovered, torn between silence and speech. Craddock took a chair near the fire, addressing them all. "Let us be clear. This was murder, deliberate, cold, and cunning. One of you knows more than you are saying." No one spoke. Tuppence broke the silence at last. "Inspector, might I suggest a line of inquiry?" He raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? And what expertise do you claim?" She smiled. "Merely that of observation. There is a door in this house, a fifth door, which seems to cause the family extraordinary discomfort whenever it is mentioned." The effect was immediate. Harriet paled further. Miss Latham shifted uneasily, and even Lady Winslow's composure cracked for the briefest instant. "A door?" Craddock repeated, his brow furrowing. "Yes," said Tuppence calmly. "I can't help but feel that Adrian's death and the secret of that door are connected." Lady Winslow rose abruptly, her voice cutting. "This is nonsense. Idle female chatter. Inspector, I must protest that my household is subjected to such frivolities at a time like this." But the damage was done. The mention of the fifth door had landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every face present. Craddock regarded them all shrewdly. "Idle chatter or not, madam, I'll have a look at this door before I'm through." Tuppence leaned closer to Tommy as the room dissolved into mutters and protests. "You see, darling," she whispered, "the more they deny, the closer we are to the truth." Tommy's expression was grim. "Let's just hope the truth doesn't come with another poisoned cup attached." The fire popped, sending sparks upward, and the long shadows of evening stretched across the drawing-room. The Winslow household sat divided, each face marked by fear, guilt, or defiance. Somewhere in the dark heart of Greystone Manor, the answer waited. And now, with a man dead among the roses, the mystery of the fifth door had grown from curiosity into menace. The air in Greystone Manor seemed thicker after Adrian's death, as if the very walls had absorbed the shock and now held it in brooding silence. The roses outside still glistened from the afternoon sun, but within the great house all brightness had retreated. Doors closed more softly, voices dropped to whispers, and footsteps carried the hesitancy of fear. Inspector Craddock had wasted little time. By evening he had gathered the household into the oak-panelled drawing-room, his questions cutting as sharply as the brass buttons on his coat. He sat forward in his chair, a notebook balanced on his knee, his gaze moving deliberately from one face to another. "Let's have no evasions," he said gruffly. "Mr. Adrian Winslow was poisoned. That much is certain. The method, tea, a simple enough disguise. The question is who and why, and I'll have answers before the night is out." Lady Winslow, tall and austere even in grief, regarded him with glacial composure. "Inspector, I must protest your tone. This is my household. We are not criminals to be treated with." "You're not criminals yet, madam," Craddock interrupted, his voice flat. "But one of you is a murderer. That makes the rest suspects, whether you like it or not." Tuppence watched closely. It was at the mention of suspects, and more particularly at the phrase "one of you," that Lady Winslow's hand, resting on the carved arm of her chair, betrayed a tremor. It was slight, quickly stilled, but unmistakable. When Craddock pressed her further, about household feuds, inheritance quarrels, or any locked rooms she preferred not to discuss, she lifted her chin. "There are no locked rooms in this house that matter to you, Inspector. My nephew's debts were his own folly, nothing more. The family will endure." But the tremor of her hand lingered in Tuppence's memory like a fingerprint. Tommy, meanwhile, had managed to slip away with the inspector's grudging permission. A search of Adrian's room was necessary, and as a guest-turned investigator, he had the knack for moving unnoticed. The chamber smelled of stale smoke and cologne, a bachelor's den dressed with careless flair, jackets draped over chairs, racing forms scattered across the dresser, ash in the tray beside the bed. It was while rifling through the desk that Tommy discovered the hidden drawer. A faint ridge gave it away. He pressed, slid, and it yielded with a soft click. Inside lay a sheaf of papers, creased and smudged with hasty handling. He drew them out into the lamplight. Sketches, crude but unmistakable. Floor plans of Greystone Manor. The west wing heavily marked, lines and annotations scrawled in the margins. Circles around doors, arrows pointing to a bold number 5. "Interesting," Tommy murmured. "Our friend Adrian was doing a bit of architecture in his spare time." Among the sketches, another paper, less artistic, more incriminating, a note unsigned demanding payment. The words were terse: "Settle by Friday or the matter will be made public." Tommy's brows rose. Blackmail. That explained much. Adrian's debts had not merely been nuisance wages, they had attracted dangerous company. He folded the papers carefully and slipped them into his coat. Meanwhile, in the drawing-room, Tuppence had cornered Miss Latham. The companion was pale, her hands twisting a handkerchief into tatters. She had avoided Craddock's harsher questions with vague replies, but Tuppence, adopting the tone of an ally rather than accuser, pressed differently. "Miss Latham," she said softly, "I know this house troubles you. I can see it. Harriet leans on you. She trusts you. But you can't help her if you remain silent. You've seen something, haven't you? Something about that door." Miss Latham's lips trembled. "You mustn't. Please, don't ask me. It's dangerous to speak of it." "Dangerous," Tuppence repeated, leaning forward. "Or shameful." The older woman's eyes filled suddenly, and the handkerchief crumpled tighter. "I didn't want to look. I told myself it was none of my concern. But once, only once, I saw Adrian in the West Wing. He thought no one followed. He had a key, I'm sure of it. He tried the lock. Oh, I heard it scrape, but the door would not yield. He cursed it, struck at it, and then he saw me. I ran before he could speak." Tuppence's heart leapt. So the fifth door was real, and Adrian sought to open it. Miss Latham shook her head frantically. "But there was nothing inside. At least, he never entered. The door held fast, I swear it." Tuppence laid a hand gently on hers. "That doesn't mean it was empty, only that it resisted him. And now he is dead. Don't you see? Whoever guards that door has reason enough for murder." The companion dissolved into quiet sobs. Tuppence let her be. She had extracted enough. Later she rejoined Tommy in their chamber, where he spread Adrian's sketches across the small writing table. Candlelight flickered over the crude lines, shadows deepening the marks of ink. "He was mapping the place," Tommy said, tapping at the West Wing. "Obsessed with it. And look here, notations about the fifth key. What do you make of that?" Tuppence leaned close. "Lady Winslow's husband. I found reference to it in the library journals. He entrusted her with something, years ago." "Then she knows more than she'll admit." Her denial was too sharp, too defensive. And did you see her hand tremble? That wasn't grief, Tommy. That was fear. He nodded grimly. Add to that Adrian's blackmail. Someone knew of his debts, pressed him for money. Perhaps he thought to solve it by unlocking a family secret, and paid with his life. The fire crackled softly, the sound a counterpoint to their thoughts. Tuppence gathered the sketches. Adrian may have failed to open the door, but someone else succeeded. And whoever that was, whoever holds the key, knows exactly what they're hiding. Tommy stretched, yawning deliberately. "Well, darling, one thing's certain. The inspector won't thank us for running ahead of him, but I doubt we'll restrain ourselves." Tuppence's smile was wry. Restraint has never been our strong suit. A soft knock startled them both. Harriet entered, her face pale, eyes darting. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I must warn you, please, don't meddle further. Adrian was reckless. He pried where he shouldn't, and it killed him. You mustn't follow." Tuppence caught her arm. "Harriet, do you know what lies beyond that door?" Harriet's breath shuddered, only that it destroyed my family once before, and it will again, if it's opened. She fled before they could question further, leaving behind only her words and the echo of dread. Tommy exhaled slowly. "Well, that clears up nothing." "On the contrary," said Tuppence softly, "it tells us the door is more important than ever." The candle guttered, shadows lengthening against the walls. In the silence that followed, the manor seemed to breathe around them, an old house steeped in secrets, its corridors echoing with whispers, its locked doors heavy with unspoken truths. And somewhere within, the murderer waited, as patient as the house itself. The rain had returned with the evening, soft but steady, a curtain that blurred the view from Greystone's high windows. By the time supper was concluded, an uneasy meal under Inspector Craddock's watchful eye, the house had sunk into brooding silence. One by one the family retired, each carrying the weight of suspicion like a cloak. The corridors darkened, the great halls hollowed with echoes, until only the creak of timber and the sigh of wind remained. Tommy and Tuppence, however, were not inclined to sleep. They had excused themselves politely after supper, retreating to their chamber with the air of weariness expected of guests. But once the household settled and footsteps dwindled, they were fully alert. "Well, old thing," Tommy murmured, striking a match for the lamp, "if we're ever to discover the truth of this business, tonight's the night." Tuppence pulled on a dark shawl, her eyes alight with resolve. Agreed. Someone has a key to that door. Adrian sought it, Lady Winslow hides it, and Miss Latham trembles at its very mention. If the murderer moves at all, it will be under cover of night. They extinguished their lamp, slipping into the corridor with only a single candle in a brass holder. The flame wavered against the wood-panelled walls, throwing long shadows that seemed to shift as they passed. The west wing was colder than the rest of the house, the air tinged with damp, as though even the hearths had been long abandoned. The carpet runner muffled their footsteps, but every board creaked like a sigh, and the silence pressed upon them with eerie weight. They took up position in a recessed alcove opposite the infamous fifth door, the candle hidden behind Tommy's coat. From here they could see the line of doors. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the fifth, broader, darker, its brass handle dull in the gloom. The scars near the lock gleamed faintly, evidence of tampering long ago. The minutes dragged. Midnight approached, measured by the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the great hall. Each hour's mark seemed louder than the last, the resonance filling the wing like a warning. Then it came, a soft tread, hesitant but deliberate, moving along the corridor. The figure carried no light, but the faint gleam of metal betrayed the outline of a key in hand. Tuppence's heart hammered. She leaned forward, whispering sharply, "Who's there?" The effect was instantaneous. The shadow froze, then bolted, retreating down the corridor with sudden, desperate speed. "After them," Tommy hissed, and together they gave chase. The pursuit was clumsy, their candle flickering wildly as they ran. The figure had a head start and knew the house's twists. Down one passage, through another, their quarry darted like a ghost through the labyrinthine manor. At last, near the turning to the servants' stairs, the figure vanished into darkness. Tommy lunged but found only emptiness, the slam of a distant door mocking their efforts. "Damnably quick," Tommy muttered, catching his breath. "Whoever it was, they've done this before." Tuppence stooped suddenly, her eyes keen even in the half-light. Wait, something fell. On the carpet lay a fragment of parchment, old and brittle. She lifted it carefully, shielding it from the candle flame. The writing was faded but legible in places, ink smudged by time. Back in their chamber, with the lamp lit and door locked, they spread it on the desk. "It's part of a will," Tuppence said, tracing the curling letters. "Listen, to my rightful heir, to be revealed upon the opening of the fifth chamber, and then it breaks." Tommy's brows rose. A hidden heir? Well, that explains a good deal. If Adrian suspected such documents existed, it would be motive enough for him to pry, and for someone else to silence him. Tuppence nodded, her mind racing. "The fifth room may hold the rest. Deeds, codicils, papers that would change the inheritance entirely, and someone in this house knows it." At dawn they brought their discovery to Inspector Craddock. He stood in the drawing-room, already weary with suspicion and lack of sleep. His eyes narrowed as Tommy laid the parchment on the table. "A fragment," Craddock said flatly. "Could be anything. Could be forged." "It's genuine," Tuppence insisted. "Old paper, original ink, and the reference to the fifth chamber is no coincidence. Adrian's sketches, Miss Latham's confession, Lady Winslow's denial, everything points to that door." The inspector scowled, folding his arms. "You're not running this investigation, madam. I am. And I won't have you two gallivanting through locked rooms and secret corridors stirring up hysteria." Tommy leaned in, voice firm. "With respect, Inspector, hysteria isn't what poisoned Adrian. Documents of inheritance are motive enough for murder. Ignore that door and you'll never find your culprit." Craddock's eyes flicked from one to the other, irritation plain. Yet beneath it lay reluctant recognition. These two had a way of seeing angles he could not. "You're meddling in dangerous ground," he growled. "If there's truth to this hidden heir, it's the sort of scandal that can ruin families, tear estates apart, and it's precisely the sort of thing worth killing for." Tuppence met his gaze evenly. "Which is why it must be uncovered, Inspector. No murderer should profit from shadows." The inspector exhaled heavily, snapping his notebook shut. "Very well. I'll humour you, for now. But one step out of line and you'll answer for it." When he turned away, muttering, Tommy gave Tuppence a wry smile. "I think that's the closest thing to gratitude we'll ever hear from him." She returned the smile faintly, her eyes on the parchment. Gratitude or not, Tommy, this changes everything. The fifth door isn't merely a curiosity, it's the heart of the crime. Until it opens, none of us are safe. The morning broke sullen and grey, a low mist clinging to the lawns and softening the hard edges of Greystone Manor. Inside, the mood was no lighter. The household gathered at breakfast in brittle silence, the clatter of silverware muted, every voice subdued. Inspector Craddock presided grimly, his expression that of a man increasingly burdened by unanswered questions. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance across the table. The fragment of the will lay folded securely in Tuppence's pocket, its discovery lending fresh urgency to their suspicions. Adrian's death had torn the veil of pretense from the Winslow family, and what it revealed was not dignity but desperation. When the last dish was cleared and Lady Winslow rose with frosty hauteur, Craddock's voice cut through. "Not so fast, madam. This business won't wait on your convenience. We're opening that door." The effect was electric. Harriet froze, colour draining from her cheeks. Miss Latham gasped audibly, clutching her embroidery as though it might shield her. Even Graves, expressionless as ever, paused in the act of clearing plates. Lady Winslow's lips thinned. "Inspector, I must insist." "You may insist all you like," Craddock said flatly. "Your nephew was poisoned. There are whispers of hidden heirs, missing documents, debts and blackmail. Everything points to that damned door. I'll not have the law accused of shrinking from a lock." Her eyes blazed, but Craddock was immovable. Tommy rose smoothly, his voice even. "Inspector, if you'll permit, I believe Mrs. Beresford and I can be of some assistance." Craddock grunted but nodded. "Very well, but mind, I'll brook no theatrics." They assembled in the West Wing at noon, the house eerily hushed as if awaiting judgment. Dust lay thick on the carpet-runner, stirred by their steps. The 4 ordinary doors passed in silence, each as innocuous as any bedchamber. Then they came to it. The 5th. The door loomed larger than the rest, its oak dark with age, its brass handles scarred from long attempts. The air seemed colder here, carrying the faint tang of mildew and something older, sadder. Craddock motioned to his constable, who produced a set of tools. For several minutes the corridor echoed with the scrape of metal, the rattle of tumblers resisting. Lady Winslow stood rigid, her hands clenched on her cane. Harriet's breath came quick, uneven. Miss Latham clutched at her sleeve, whispering frantic prayers. At last, with a final wrench, the lock gave way. The door swung inward with a groan, a sigh of hinges long unused. The sight within stilled every tongue, a nursery. The room was preserved in dust and silence, as though time itself had stopped. Faded wallpaper, patterned with once bright balloons and rabbits, peeled at the corners. A cradle stood in one corner, a child's toys scattered on the floor, wooden blocks, a tin soldier, a rag doll whose button eyes stared blankly. Curtains hung heavy and moth-eaten, filtering the weak daylight into muted bars across the room. The air was oppressive, thick with the sorrow of abandonment. Tuppence stepped forward slowly, her voice hushed. A child lived here, and was forgotten. Harriet pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Lady Winslow's cane struck the floor sharply. "Enough! This room was sealed for good reason. It should never have been disturbed." Craddock's jaw set. "And yet, it has everything to do with your nephew's murder." The inspector and constable searched methodically. Drawers yielded nothing but brittle clothes, tiny shoes yellowed with age. Cupboards revealed dust, old picture books, a rocking horse stiff with cobwebs. For a moment it seemed the mystery had dissolved into nothing more than melancholy. Then Tommy, ever observant, tapped at the base of a wardrobe. The hollow sound was different. He crouched, running his hand along the panel until his fingers found a catch. With a sharp tug, a false bottom sprang free. Inside lay a small iron trunk, locked but fragile with rust. Craddock nodded curtly. "Open it." The lock surrendered after a few determined blows. The lid creaked back, and all leaned forward as though compelled. Documents lay within, bundles of folded parchment, sealed letters, a leather folio. The inspector lifted the topmost paper, his eyes scanning swiftly. Then he read aloud. "This codicil amends the will of Jonathan Winslow. The estate of Greystone, with all lands and holdings, is to pass not to my nephew Adrian Winslow, but to my daughter Harriet Winslow upon her majority." The silence that followed was palpable. Harriet swayed, clutching at the wall. Lady Winslow gave a strangled cry, quickly mastered, but her face was ashen. Tuppence's eyes blazed. "Then Adrian was never the rightful heir. Harriet is." Craddock flipped through the rest. Deeds, legal documents, all carefully executed. And beneath them, he paused, frowning. An object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small glass vial. The liquid inside glistened faintly green. The inspector's voice was grim. "Poison." A shudder ran through the group. Miss Latham whimpered. Harriet stared as though struck dumb. Lady Winslow's hand trembled upon her cane. "Hidden with the papers," Craddock said. "The very weapon that killed Adrian, kept here, alongside proof of his usurpation. He must have suspected, perhaps even discovered this cache, and someone made sure he would never use it." Tuppence's voice was low but certain. The door wasn't only a matter of family shame. It was the vault of inheritance. Adrian tried to pry it open to control the truth, and that truth killed him. Craddock turned on Lady Winslow sharply. "Did you know of this, madam?" Her composure cracked at last. Her shoulders shook, her voice breaking. "I knew. Jonathan hid something here. After the child died, our first daughter, it was all too much. He shut the nursery, locked it, forbade its mention. When he died, I believed the matter buried forever." "You knew Harriet was heir?" Craddock demanded. She lifted her head, eyes blazing through her tears. "I suspected. But Adrian was my sister's boy. He was bright, charming. He carried the Winslow name. How could I allow this house to pass to a girl, fragile, unready, with no strength for Greystone's burdens?" Her confession fell into silence, heavy with implication. Miss Latham spoke suddenly, her voice rising in tremor. "Adrian came to me once. He said he would find the key, prove himself master of the house. I begged him to leave it, but he laughed. He said secrets are only treasures waiting to be spent." Harriet's voice, choked with tears, broke in. "So you all knew in fragments, but no one told me. My whole life lived in shadows of lies." Tommy laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "Sometimes lies are built to protect, but more often they protect nothing at all." Craddock replaced the papers and vial in the trunk, his face set. "This changes everything. The motive is clear enough now. Adrian's hold on the estate was false. Someone here, knew he was on the verge of exposure. They silenced him to keep the truth buried." Lady Winslow gave a long, shuddering sigh and sank into the nursery chair, the dust rising around her like smoke. "I only wanted to preserve the family. Instead, I have destroyed it." The inspector ordered the trunk carried to his office, its contents sealed as evidence. As the constable bore it away, the sound of the latch echoed through the room, final and ominous. Tommy and Tuppence lingered, gazing around the forgotten nursery. The cradle, the faded wallpaper, the scattered toys, all whispered of innocence lost, of secrets that had festered too long. Tuppence's voice was soft, almost reverent. So much sorrow, hidden behind a door. And yet it was only paper after all. Words, signatures, claims. Enough to destroy a family, enough to kill. Tommy nodded. The dead hand of the past. It grips tighter than the living, sometimes. As they turned to leave, Harriet paused, her fingers brushing the edge of the cradle. "If I am truly heir, what does it matter? Adrian is gone, and with him any claim. I inherit nothing but ruins." Tuppence looked at her kindly. "You inherit the truth, Harriet, and truth, once revealed, has a way of remaking everything." They stepped back into the corridor, leaving the nursery to its shadows. The fifth door swung shut behind them, its mystery no longer hidden, but its consequences only beginning. The discovery of the nursery had cracked the walls of silence at Greystone, but it had not brought peace. Instead, the atmosphere thickened like a storm held just beyond the horizon, pressing down upon the house with unbearable weight. By evening, Inspector Craddock had summoned the household once more to the long drawing-room. The great chandelier threw pale light over anxious faces, Lady Winslow stiff as marble, Harriet trembling but defiant, Miss Latham twisting her handkerchief to threads, and Graves standing silent in the shadows like an ebony carving. Tommy and Tuppence took their seats unobtrusively to one side, but their eyes were bright, every sense alert. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice gruff and uncompromising. "We've had a murder. Adrian Winslow poisoned in broad daylight, and now we know why. The papers in that trunk prove his claim to Greystone was false. Harriet Winslow was the rightful heir. Motive, ladies and gentlemen, in large, bold letters." A ripple passed through the group. Harriet flinched. Lady Winslow's lips thinned. Miss Latham made a faint sound as if stifling a sob. "But motive," Craddock continued, "isn't enough. I want means, I want opportunity, and by heaven I'll have the truth before another corpse graces this house." He fixed his gaze first on Harriet. "You, miss, did you know you were heir?" Harriet swallowed, her eyes darting to her aunt before returning to the inspector. "I suspected," she said softly. "Not the details, never the documents, but I felt there were secrets. My aunt, she kept things locked away. I was told never to ask questions about the nursery. It was as though part of the house didn't exist. And Adrian, he lorded it over me, sneering, reminding me that I was dependent, that I had no rights. I feared that if there was truth behind my suspicions, it would ruin us all." Tuppence leaned forward gently. "So you kept silent? You feared scandal more than justice?" Harriet's cheeks coloured. "Yes, I was afraid. Is that so wrong?" Tommy interjected mildly. "Fear makes accomplices of us all, in small ways. But poison, Miss Winslow, is another matter entirely." Craddock turned next to Lady Winslow, his tone sharpening. "And you, madam, you knew." Her gaze, cold and proud, met his without faltering. "I knew Jonathan hid something. After the child died." She broke off, her voice catching for the first time. "Our first daughter. She lived only months. The nursery became a tomb. My husband locked it, forbade its mention. Later, when Harriet was born, he made arrangements, but he never trusted Adrian. He suspected the boy's weakness, his vanity. I thought it best left buried. The house needed strength, not more sorrow." "You let Adrian pose as heir," Craddock said flatly, knowing it was false. Her chin lifted. "Better a false heir than a scandal. Better Greystone in Adrian's careless hands than dragged through courts and whispers." Tuppence's voice, low but cutting, broke in. "It wasn't only about inheritance, was it, Lady Winslow? It was about control. The fifth door symbolized your authority, your ability to decide what the world could and could not know. You built silence into the very stones." Lady Winslow's hand trembled upon her cane, but she made no reply. Craddock swung his attention to Miss Latham, who shrank under his stare. "And you, miss? You admit you saw Adrian try the lock. You knew about the papers." She shook her head rapidly. "I didn't know what they contained, only that something was hidden. I begged him not to meddle." He laughed. "He said secrets were meant to be exploited. I was terrified, but I never poisoned him." "Terrified," Craddock echoed. "Of what?" Her lips quivered. "Of losing my place, of being turned out, of the truth itself. Houses like this, Inspector, are built on silence. If one stone crumbles, the whole edifice falls." Her words hung in the air like a confession, but Craddock was not satisfied. He turned at last to the figure standing in the shadows. "Graves." The butler stepped forward smoothly, his expression unchanged. "Inspector? You've served this family long?" "All my life. My father before me." "And you were Jonathan Winslow's confidant?" A pause. "I served him faithfully." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "Which means you knew what he hid. You knew about the fifth key." Graves inclined his head slightly. "I knew that the master locked certain matters away. He did not confide details." "Evasive," Craddock snapped. "Too evasive. Adrian was blackmailed. Notes demanding money. Who better placed than a butler, with access to his room, his papers, his weaknesses?" For the first time, Graves's composure wavered. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered. "I never demanded a penny. I held Adrian in contempt, yes, but I would not stoop to extortion." Tuppence's voice was cool. "Contempt can be motive enough. To preserve a house you believed already corrupted. To silence a man you thought unworthy." Lady Winslow's cane struck the floor. Enough. Graves is loyal. He would never. But her defence rang hollow. Accusations now flew like sparks. Harriet sobbed that Adrian had threatened her. Miss Latham protested that she had nothing to gain. Lady Winslow declared she alone had sacrificed for the family. Graves said nothing, but his silence weighed more heavily than words. Inspector Craddock's patience frayed. He slammed his notebook shut, rising with sudden force. Enough of riddles and half-truths. A man is dead, poisoned before your very eyes, and every one of you has motive. Money, shame, fear, pride, take your pick. But I'll not leave Greystone until I've torn the mask from the guilty face. The silence that followed was tense, electric. The fire in the grate hissed as a log collapsed, sparks leaping upward. Tuppence, her voice steady, spoke into the silence. "Inspector, may I suggest that we stop looking at the fifth door as a mere hiding place? It was never just about money. It was about power, about the psychology of concealment. Lady Winslow concealed her husband's decision. Miss Latham concealed her fear. Harriet concealed her suspicions. Graves conceals more than he admits. Concealment itself is the family's legacy, and concealment, Inspector, breeds murder." Her words settled heavily on the room. Each face reflected the truth in them. Shame, fear, denial. Tommy added quietly, "It isn't who could profit. It's who couldn't bear the truth revealed. That's where you'll find your killer." Craddock's eyes swept the room, hard and uncompromising. "Then by God, tomorrow we strip every layer of this family's secrets. No more silence, no more locked doors." He strode from the room, his constable in tow. The Winslows and their retainers remained behind, stunned into immobility. Lady Winslow clutched her cane as though it alone held her upright. Harriet sat weeping quietly, her shoulders shaking. Miss Latham closed her eyes, lips moving soundlessly in prayer. Graves stood rigid, his face carved from stone. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a look. They had seen households unravel before, but never one so bound by secrecy. Tuppence's whisper carried the weight of prophecy. The truth will break this family. The only question is, who will it break first? The storm had returned to Dorset. Rain lashed the high windows of Greystone Manor, and the wind rattled the panes like a restless spirit. Within, the great drawing-room blazed with firelight, but the warmth could not thaw the chill that hung over the assembled household. Inspector Craddock had insisted upon this gathering. His manner was brusque, his voice clipped as he ordered chairs drawn into a semicircle before the hearth. "No more secrets," he declared, "no more evasions. Tonight, we finish this." Lady Winslow sat rigid in her high-backed chair, her cane gripped like a sceptre, her face pale as alabaster. Harriet hovered near the mantel, anxious, wringing her hands. Miss Latham perched on the edge of her seat, eyes darting nervously from face to face. Graves, the butler, stood with measured calm at the far end, his posture immaculate, his expression inscrutable. Tommy and Tuppence, side by side, occupied a modest settee. They did not appear to command the gathering, yet the energy of the room seemed to lean toward them, waiting. Craddock himself stood with arms folded, his gaze impatient, but there was a flicker in his eyes that betrayed grudging expectation. It was Tuppence who broke the silence. "My husband and I have had the privilege of watching this tragedy unfold from an outsider's vantage. We saw grief, fear, and secrecy, and gradually we discerned the pattern beneath." She rose, her voice carrying clear, calm authority. "Let us begin with Adrian. He was charming, careless, riddled with debts. But Adrian was also ambitious. He discovered, or strongly suspected, that documents existed which could threaten his hold on Greystone. The sketches we found in his room, the fragment of a will dropped in the corridor, the attempts at the fifth lock, all prove he knew something lay hidden." She paused, eyes sweeping the circle. But Adrian made a mistake. He thought to exploit the secret, to manipulate it for his gain, and that mistake cost him his life. Tommy rose now, his tone steady. On the day of his death, the family gathered in the garden. Adrian's glass was switched, hurriedly, clumsily. We saw it. He lifted a cup meant for another, and within minutes he was dead. Harriet gave a soft gasp. Miss Latham clutched her handkerchief tighter. Lady Winslow's lips pressed thinner, her eyes blazing defiance. Craddock leaned forward. "And whose cup was it meant to be?" "That, Inspector," Tuppence said quietly, is the heart of it. Adrian was not the intended victim. The poison was meant for Harriet. A collective shock rippled through the room. Harriet staggered, paling visibly. For me? Yes, Tuppence said gravely. Because Harriet is the rightful heir. The documents in the nursery prove it. Adrian had no claim. He knew it, and others knew it too. To silence Harriet was to preserve the illusion, to bury the truth forever. Craddock snapped. And who had both means and opportunity? Tommy's gaze shifted to the butler. Graves. The name hung in the air like a bell toll. Graves did not move. His face remained carved from stone. Tommy continued. Only Graves poured the tea. Only Graves had access to the kitchen, to the pantry, to the silver tray. He was trusted implicitly. He moved behind us all, silent as a shadow. He alone could slip a vial from trunk to teacup without notice. Lady Winslow rose sharply, her cane striking the floor. How dare you! Graves has served this family faithfully all his life. Tuppence's eyes fixed on her. On your orders, Lady Winslow. The words struck like a whip. The room fell utterly still. Rain drummed on the glass. The fire crackled, but no one breathed. You knew, Tuppence went on softly. You knew your husband had named Harriet. You could not bear scandal, nor the loss of control. When Adrian pressed too close, you grew desperate. You commanded Graves to act, to poison Harriet before she could claim her right. Lady Winslow's face contorted, pride warring with despair. Lies, she cried. I sought only to protect. Protect, Tommy interrupted firmly, or to preserve. There is a difference. Inspector Craddock's gaze narrowed. Well, Graves, you've heard the charge. What say you? The butler's eyes flickered at last. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. I did as I was told. Always I did as I was told. The mistress feared disgrace, the destruction of Greystone's name. She asked that I act. I obeyed. Harriet cried out, covering her face. Miss Latham moaned, sinking against her chair. Lady Winslow swayed, the cane trembling in her grasp. You poisoned Adrian, Craddock said harshly. Graves shook his head once. No, I poured the poison into Harriet's cup. Adrian took it by mistake. I did not mean... Tuppence's voice cut across him. Murder by obedience is still murder, Graves. The butler's mask slipped. For the first time, raw emotion crossed his features. Anguish, perhaps, or bitter resignation. I served this house. I gave it everything. And in return, this. He laughed once, hollow. So be it. Lady Winslow collapsed back into her chair, her composure shattered. I only wanted to protect the family, she whispered. Jonathan's memory, Greystone's honour. I never thought, never dreamed it would end like this. Craddock stepped forward, his voice grim. You thought to bury truth with poison, but truth has a way of clawing free. He signalled to his constable. Take him. Graves did not resist as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. He straightened, shoulders squared, and allowed himself to be led away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, diminishing into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Harriet spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. So, it is finished. The fifth door is open, the papers revealed, the poisoner unmasked. And yet, I feel no triumph, only sorrow. Tuppence crossed to her, taking her hand gently. Because the truth always carries sorrow with it, Harriet. But it also carries freedom. You need no longer live in shadows. Lady Winslow lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. Harriet, child, forgive me. I was blinded by pride. I thought I could hold the house together by silence. Instead, I have torn it apart. Harriet's gaze softened, though her voice was heavy. I will not forget, Mother, but perhaps in time I may forgive. Tommy glanced toward Tuppence, his expression solemn. It seems, old thing, that doors locked for too long breed more than dust. They breed tragedy. Tuppence nodded. But once opened, they can never be shut again. Inspector Craddock cleared his throat, weary but firm. The law will take its course. Graves will stand trial. Lady Winslow, your part will be examined, though the butler shoulders the act. As for you, Miss Harriet, prepare yourself. You are mistress of Greystone now. The estate, the name, the burden, they are yours. Harriet bowed her head. A heavy inheritance, but perhaps, with truth in the open, I can build something better." The inspector gathered his papers, signalling the end. One by one, the family drifted from the room. Miss Latham guided Lady Winslow gently. Harriet lingered by the hearth, her face lit by firelight and shadow. At last, only Tommy and Tuppence remained, side by side before the dying embers. "Well," Tommy said quietly, "another case concluded." Tuppence gave a small, wry smile. "Concluded? Perhaps. But mysteries never truly end, do they? They echo, like the laughter of a child in a locked nursery, or the whisper of a will in a trunk. The world is never tidy." Tommy slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Maybe not, but we've done our part, and tomorrow the sun will rise and the world will feel a shade cleaner." Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened to a patter, the wind fell quiet. Within, the fire burned low, its last flames curling upward before fading into ash. The fifth door had opened, and with it the secrets of Greystone had spilled into the light. The shadows were banished, but the cost would linger forever in the echoing halls of the manor. The storm passed in the night, leaving Greystone Manor washed clean but strangely hollow. The morning light, pale and thin, spilled through high windows onto the stone floors, illuminating dust motes that drifted like restless spirits. The house, once taut with secrecy, now lay slack, its burdened heart exposed. Harriet Winslow stood at the threshold of the great hall, her eyes fixed on the fifth door at the far end of the west wing. It remained ajar, the nursery beyond flooded with the clear light of day. For years it had been the family's unspoken shadow, its lock a symbol of silence. Now, with its contents revealed, it was merely a room, dusty, sorrowful, but no longer forbidden. She sighed, the weight of inheritance pressing heavily upon her shoulders. "All my life," she murmured, "I wondered why the house never felt like mine, and now I know. It never was, not until now." Tuppence, standing beside her, touched her hand gently. "Sometimes we don't inherit houses, Harriet. We inherit truths, and those weigh heavier than stone." Tommy, lingering by the staircase with his hands in his pockets, added lightly, "Though stone has the advantage of not answering back." His dry smile softened Harriet's grief for a moment, and she managed a faint laugh. The inspector's work was nearly done. Graves had been taken away the night before, his expression resigned, his figure dignified even in disgrace. Lady Winslow had retired to her chamber after the revelation, her collapse sudden, her willpower at last broken. She had not emerged since, save for a tray carried in by Miss Latham. Now, as Craddock prepared to depart, he paused in the drawing-room where Tommy and Tuppence waited. His manner was still gruff, but there was an edge of reluctant respect. "You've meddled more than I care for," he admitted, tucking his notebook away. "But without you, I'd still be staring at that cursed lock and wondering why it mattered." Tommy inclined his head. "We meddle best when the law is looking the other way." Craddock's moustache bristled. "See that you meddle elsewhere next time." Still, he hesitated, as if the words cost him effort. "You've sharp eyes, the pair of you. I'll not say I welcome your kind of help, but I can't deny you've a knack." Tuppence smiled graciously. "That's almost a compliment, Inspector." "Don't press your luck," he growled, and departed with a curt nod. By noon the household had dwindled. Miss Latham, her loyalty shaken, approached Harriet in the hall. "I think, my dear, it is time I left Greystone. My place was with your aunt when she held the family together. Now, I would only be a reminder of shadows." Harriet embraced her, tears glimmering. "You were kind to me when kindness was rare. I won't forget it." Miss Latham's departure was quiet, a single trunk carried out by the footman. Her figure vanished down the drive, swallowed by the mist. Lady Winslow remained in her rooms, curtains drawn, a queen deposed in her solitude. Rumour whispered she might leave Dorset entirely, retreating abroad to live among strangers rather than face the estate she had sought so fiercely to control. And so Harriet remained, mistress at last, but with a house echoing emptier than before. The inheritance was hers, but it came wrapped in grief and fractured trust. That evening, Tommy and Tuppence took one last walk through the west wing. The nursery door stood wide, the air fresher now, windows open to let the wind scour away years of silence. They lingered by the cradle, the faded wallpaper, the scattered toys. "So much sorrow," Tuppence whispered. locked away, but never gone. That's the trouble with secrets. They rot in the dark until the smell spreads everywhere. Tommy studied the faded doll slumped in the corner, its button eyes dulled by dust. I can't say I care for nurseries. Give me a decent smoking room any day. Less pathos. Tuppence smiled faintly. And fewer ghosts. They shut the door gently, not locking it, but leaving it open to air and light. The next morning dawned clear. Their bags were packed, the car readied. Harriet met them on the front steps, her figure small but steady against the massive stone facade. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice still weighted with sorrow. "Not only for solving Adrian's death, but for giving me the truth. It hurts, yes, but it frees me too. Perhaps in time Greystone will be less a tomb, more a home." Tuppence kissed her cheek warmly. "You'll manage, Harriet. You're stronger than you know." Tommy clasped her hand with his usual ease. "And if ever the house grows too quiet, you can always adopt a terrier. Terriers demand the truth and bark it at all hours. Very sound creatures." Harriet laughed softly, the first true laugh since the tragedy. "Perhaps I shall." They left her standing at the steps, the sun breaking through clouds to fall across her shoulders like a benediction. The road from Greystone wound through rolling countryside, damp fields gleaming under the new light. The manor receded behind them, its towers shrinking into the horizon. For a while they drove in silence, each absorbed in thought. Finally, Tuppence turned, her eyes reflective. "You know, Tommy, it strikes me that secrets are double-edged. Some destroy when hidden, festering until they poison everything. Others destroy when revealed, shattering the illusions people build their lives upon. Which is worse, I wonder?" Tommy considered, the corner of his mouth quirking. "Neither, perhaps. It's not the secret, but the keeping of it. Too long in the dark, and even the truth turns toxic." She nodded slowly. "Yes. And yet, would Harriet be happier never knowing? Or has she gained something by learning at last?" "Hard to say," he admitted, "but one thing I am sure of." "And that is?" He grinned. "In future, darling, we avoid any house with more than 4 doors. Once you reach 5, you can be certain one of them hides a corpse, a scandal, or both." Tuppence laughed, her clear voice ringing out across the quiet lane. "Then our travels will be much simplified." The car sped on, the road stretching toward new horizons. Behind them, Greystone Manor stood emptied of its ghosts at last. The 5th door was open and its secrets laid bare. But the echoes of the past would linger, woven into the stones, whispering to those who dared to listen. For Tommy and Tuppence, it was another chapter closed, another mystery consigned to memory. And as Dorset faded behind them, the future opened before them, uncertain, intriguing, and, as always, waiting to be discovered.